What's going on, everyone? My name is Navpreet Singh. Some of you may know me from other platforms as Nav the Poet. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Nav, where it's all about me and what I like to talk about. It's been a long time coming, but I am finally properly making content for this channel. And me being me, I couldn't start off with something small and simple. No, that would be far too logical. Instead, I decided to start my journey into the tube of you with a massive project, that being an entire series retrospective of one of my favorite shows of all time, Smallville. Somebody save me. Just as a refresher, Smallville is a television show that chronicles the journey of a young Clark Kent into becoming the Man of Steel we all know and love, Superman. It ran from 2001 to 2011 on the WB-CW network. It lasted 10 seasons with 217 episodes total, and I feel it's fair to say that Smallville's success is a huge reason for the superhero boom we saw in the 2010s. But I'll get to that one day in a separate video. Now, I don't want to keep y'all waiting too long, but before I dive into the series, I want to set some parameters for this so we're all on the same page. Number one, these videos will be sharing my opinions of the show. You don't have to agree. In fact, I welcome thoughtful debate. But if I don't like a character or an episode that you like, or vice versa, all I ask is you not be a jerk about it. Fair? Okay. Number two, I will be exploring this show season by season, meaning each season will be covered in a separate video. Number three, I'll be going over the episodes as I see fit. I'm not necessarily going to dive deep into every episode and recap every moment. This is going to be what I picked up from each episode, if there's anything at all, during my recent rewatch. I'll only comment on things I find noteworthy, good or bad. Some episodes I may skip entirely, and others I may rave about for 10 minutes. Number four, while I may hint or reference to things that happen in future seasons, I'm mostly talking about the show as I go through it. So there won't be many mentions to future events, but there are some exceptions. Number five, I am not going to talk about Allison Mack. This video series is about the show, not the actors or the heinous things that they've done. And number six, let's have fun. I hope to find other Smallville fans through this series so that we can all share in our love for the show together. By the way, what nickname is there for fans of Smallville? Smallvillians? Smallvilleites? Anything? Let me know in the comments what you come up with. Okay, I think that is everything I needed to cover. So with that said, let's get into the show. Starting with the first episode. The pilot episode, named, Pilot, aired on October 16th, 2001. There is so much to say about this episode, so let's discuss. The series opens up with a shot of space and meteors along with a ship heading towards Earth. Ooh, what could that be? Then we cut to a helicopter flying over a cornfield and a "Welcome to Smallville" sign. On-screen text tells us it's October 1989. Then we cut to a newspaper headline. Okay, pause. Y'all remember that thing about not referring to future seasons? Well, we already have an exception. So Lionel Luthor, Lex's father, is the one holding this paper, and the headline reads, "Queen Industries CEO missing, presumed dead." This is the first minute of the first episode of the entire series, and we are already getting world building. Oliver Queen does not enter the story until season 6, but we get a mention of his parents before we even see Clark. We are already being told about the world beyond the world that we haven't even gotten to explore yet. I honestly forgot this moment even existed until this rewatch, and I was so blown away because Oliver's parents do get brought up later in the series. How can you not appreciate this show with such simple yet awesome moments like this? Anyway, Lionel is telling young Lex with red hair not to be afraid while in the helicopter, whatever. We then have the Kents entering a flower shop. Okay, pause. I only noticed this during this rewatch, but do y'all recall Nell's reaction to seeing Jonathan walk in and then Martha? She's excited when he does, and then becomes less thrilled when she does. Was there a drop plotline of something happening between Nell and Jonathan? I know that the pilot is produced before the rest of the show because it's what's used to sell the show to a network. So sometimes ideas that are set up in the pilot don't end up making it into the series because changes get made once the show is picked up. I don't know if there are plans for a story there, but why include this if there wasn't? Let me know your thoughts. Either way, I'm glad they didn't go further with this moment. It would have made no sense and been totally unnecessary drama. Next, a fairy princess costume Lana grants Martha a wish, and she talks to Jonathan in the car about wanting a kid. This sweet and wholesome interaction of Jonathan reassuring Martha while she stares into the sky, thinking about having a kid one day, is a simple moment of character building and plot setup. Great stuff. Then we see Lionel making some sort of deal, which we later find out is the Ross family selling land to him. I'll talk about it later when it gets brought up again, but there are these small moments in the pilot that set this show up so well. Lex gets lost in a cornfield and ends up seeing a guy tied to a cross as the meteors start to crash in Smallville. Great shot of Lex's POV looking up at this guy and a meteor flying in the sky behind him. We straight up see Lana's parents get obliterated by a meteor shower. I know I shouldn't laugh, but it just caught me so off guard. Anyway, they went all out on the special effects for this scene alone. The visuals for the meteor shower and the destruction they cause are amazing. Because of the meteors, Jonathan and Martha crash their vehicle, driving into a cloud of smoke. Then Lionel looks for Lex in the now flattened cornfield and finds him completely in shock with most of his hair gone. Okay, pause. Did Lex just decide never to grow hair again? Was that some residual trauma? Was having hair too emotionally painful for him? Anyway, a little boy finds Martha and Jonathan in the car, which has been turned over. Then, once they get out, they find the ship. And that is the opening sequence for this series. It's honestly pretty incredible. In the first almost 10 minutes, the show gives us all the key things we need to know about our main characters. Lana's parents are dead, and she's sad. Lex almost got killed, and he's bald. And Martha and Jonathan couldn't conceive, so Lana gave them an alien child. And it still has time to drop subtle moments of world building and character setup, like the way Lionel talks to Lex about not being afraid and needing to embrace his destiny. We'll get into that more later because there is a whole lot of conversation about destiny in this show. It feels like at least once or twice an episode, destiny is brought up. And I get it, but it can be a bit too much sometimes. Regardless, this is a fantastic opening to the series. Okay, so we jump forward to today, which doesn't tell us anything. But we see Clark looking at articles of people performing amazing feats, and you see his eyes going back and forth really quickly as he stares at the computer screen. I think this is one of the only times they show Clark speed reading, which he's able to do because his brain processes information way faster than humans. Just a cool display of his lesser mentioned powers. Also, this scene sort of sets up the entire show in a way. It's about Clark on his journey to becoming Superman, and Smallville starts him at a point where he doesn't know anything about his abilities or his heritage. So he's doing what he can to understand things and make sense of what's going on with him, because yeah, he's a teenager and he's experiencing changes, but these are not your average teenager changes. And in the next scene, he's asking his dad to sign the permission slip so he can join the football team. His dad refuses because he's worried about an accident happening with Clark's powers. Smallville really knew how to focus on the struggles of being Clark. In this moment, Clark is already being challenged with taking on the responsibility that comes with these gifts. I've always said this, but Smallville is basically the Spider-Man story for Superman. Jonathan is telling Clark that with great powers come great responsibility. Also, shout out to Annette O'Toole, who plays Martha Kent, and John Schneider, who plays Jonathan Kent. They are so dang good at playing these warm and loving, yet firm parental figures. Moving on, Clark misses the bus and super speeds to school. He runs through a field, so we don't actually get to see his super speed, which is a cool way to tease it. We're then introduced to 2 more season regulars, Chloe Sullivan, a totally made-up character for the show, and Pete Ross, an actual character from the comics. Clark catches up with them at school. Chloe starts talking about the strange things that are happening in this town, which is set up for the basic premise of the weekly episodes. Clark then goes to talk to Lana Lang, but trips right in front of her, dropping all of his books. We learn this a little later in the episode, but she's wearing a necklace made of the meteor fragments that killed her parents. And then she says,
"So what are you, man or Superman?"
Okay, pause. This is one of the many not so subtle references to Superman lore. And I love every single one of them, even the ones that make my eyes roll. It's part of the charm and camp that is Smallville, something I thoroughly enjoy about this series. Oh, during this interaction with Lana, her boyfriend Whitney shows up. I don't really care for Whitney, but he's sort of relevant, so I figure he's worth mentioning. Okay, so cut to later in the day, and we see Lana cheerleading, which I completely forgot about because it's relevant for barely an episode, and Clark is watching from the bleachers. Pete approaches him in his football uniform. Again, a simple scene, but it's effective in setting up the story. This scene highlights Clark's desire to live a normal life and be part of that teenage world, but keeps his distance because of his abilities, making him feel so out of place. And then he's shown standing alone on a bridge, leaning over the guardrail, looking fairly sullen, probably because he can't have a normal life like he wants. And his life is about to get way less normal because Lex Luthor, who was driving his Porsche at a dangerously fast speed, loses control when he drives over something and hits Clark, hits the guardrail, and goes over it and falls into the water below. Iconic scene. They really went all out for this pilot, and it was so worth it. Also, this scene is shown in the theme song, so I see it all the time. I don't know about y'all, but I always love when I'm watching an episode and I recognize a scene that was used in the theme song. Speaking of, no theme song for episode 1. Back to the story. Clark ripping through the roof of the car and saving Lex is officially his first save of the show. I love that when Jonathan comes by to get Clark, he does not give Lex even a moment of his time. This man does not care and does not like Lex, and we'll find out why a bit later. But the big thing about this scene is that this is the catalyst for Lex's obsessive nature. Clark comes home the next day to see a car gifted to him by Lex, but Jonathan says he has to give it back, mostly because Jonathan doesn't like the Luthors, and I support his decision fully. Jonathan again talks about normal, and Clark responds by sticking his arm in a wood chipper, which we see when Jonathan pulls his arm out only ruins his shirt. The display of Clark's powers is so good, and honestly, it just gets better with time. It's important to note that in 2001, special effects were not where they are now, especially in the superhero genre. Smallville innovated a lot of the design and style of these superhero feats, which have since been used in future superhero media. It deserves so much more love for its impact on the genre. Anyway, Jonathan shows Clark his spaceship and tells him that they found him after the meteor shower, which causes Clark to run away, terrified. Understandably so. I think the creators were so smart to start the show pretty early in Clark's journey because, one, it means they can take their time with this story because there is so much for him to learn. And two, he functions as the audience's viewpoint in a way that's more than just being the main character. He is figuring things out at the same time as the audience. We are on the same journey as him, and that's really cool. So Clark ends up in a graveyard at night, and Lana shows up to see her parents' grave. She introduces Clark to them, and the two have a nice chat. This is probably my favorite scene of the episode. Look, I am a Chloe shipper for life, but this scene is really wholesome. Clark and Lana do have great chemistry, and the early seasons really highlight how well they vibe with each other. Lex and Clark have their first real interaction when Clark goes to return the car. Lex is already kind of weird, talking about he wants nothing to stand in the way of their friendship. You just met the kid, dude. Relax. Lex gives off such creepy vibes, And that's not even addressing the age difference. Chloe introduces Clark to her wall of weird, which is a wall where she tracks all the stories of weird and unexplained things that go on in Smallville. Oh yeah, Chloe runs the school newspaper, The Torch. Anyway, the reason she does this is because she's following the story of some deaths in town and noticed some suspicious looking guy in the crowd. He turns out to be the kid who was strung up in the cornfield during the meteor shower 12 years prior. Somehow he survived and hasn't aged. This sets up a recurring plot device of the series, especially the early seasons. People getting abilities because of the meteor rocks. Okay, I'm gonna stop calling them that. It's kryptonite. Radioactive pieces of Clark's home planet, Krypton. Anyway, this story of this kid Jeremy has been going on throughout the episode, but I haven't mentioned it because it's almost completely irrelevant and infinitely less interesting than everything else in this episode. But it is worth mentioning because this concept of people with abilities is integral to the series. So Clark gets beat up by Whitney and strung up in a cornfield on a cross like a scarecrow. Or Jesus. Okay, pause. I never like the Jesus metaphor writers impose on Superman. He's not Jesus. He's a Moses metaphor. And when they depict him in this Christ-like manner, they surround him with this energy of superiority, and that isn't Superman. I don't think that's Jesus either, but that I could be wrong about. I don't know. Anyway, the way Whitney got Clark in this vulnerable state was because he had Lana's necklace on him and he put it on Clark. Whitney was mad that Clark was spending time with Lana. That's why he did this, by the way. Oh, and I like the audio cues for kryptonite being activated whenever Clark is exposed to it. Just something I wanted to note. Anyway, Lex finds Clark after seeing Jeremy hop the fence, unties him, and begins to question him, but Clark runs off to stop Jeremy. Right, I forgot to mention, Jeremy has the ability to manipulate electricity. It's not super relevant, but just figured I'd share. Clark catches up with Jeremy, who went to the high school, to attack the students at homecoming. They fight, and Jeremy hits Clark with a car, but Clark is unfazed. It looks pretty cool, but a mix of water and electricity shocks Jeremy, knocking him out. He comes to, and he doesn't remember anything. It's not special, but again, sets up a common plot device, lovingly referred to by fans as Freak of the Week. Clark misses the homecoming dance, which is unfortunate because Lana promised him a dance if he was there. But then Lana shows up in his loft and they dance. Except they didn't, because Clark imagined it, I think? This feels like some sort of Inception moment. Then Clark sees Lana, who lives next door, heading to her home. He says thanks for the dance, pretty softly I might add, but Lana reacts as if she heard it and then smiles. I don't get what they were going for here. What was that scene? But the episode ends with the song Everything by Lifehouse, probably the most recurring musical artist used on the show, as the camera pans up to the sky and the credits roll. And that was episode 1. Again, not every episode is going to get this in depth, but I truly felt there was so much about this episode that needed to be discussed and explained because it establishes the show so well. By the end of the first episode, we know who Clark is, the people in his life, the relationships he has with them, and what he knows of his own identity. We get angsty teenager moments as well as the best friend sidekicks in Chloe and Pete. We get the firm yet loving parenting of the Kents, the formation of Clark and Lex's relationship, the early chemistry between Clark and Lana, and even Whitney as a sort of antagonist. I didn't care for the Jeremy plot, but it's a necessary device to set up because it's used throughout the series, so I understand it. But still, overall, this episode is incredible and does pretty much everything that it needs to do right to introduce the audience to this world. On to episode 2, Metamorphosis. Okay, so 1 episode in and Clark is already flying. Sorta. Okay, pause. It's time to discuss the no tights, no flight edict the show was given. I've read several reasons for the idea that Clark would not fly or don the Superman suit, but the most common one seems to be a decision by the showrunners. They wanted the show to focus on Clark's journey to becoming Superman. Flying and wearing the suit would essentially mean the completion of that journey. But what's funny is that throughout this series, both of these things are heavily teased, and that rule is bent a lot. For instance, in this episode, Clark is flying over Smallville. Except it's a dream. But he wakes up and he's hovering over his bed, only to immediately fall down and crash. They cheat the rule in this way a lot, and I'll talk about it more as it happens throughout the series and in a separate video, because I seem to be of the minority opinion that it isn't a problem he doesn't fly or wear the suit until the end of the series. That really seems to upset people, but not me. Moving on, this is an okay episode and basically settles us into the typical formula for the show. Someone in the town gets powers after being exposed to kryptonite, and then Clark has to stop them, is usually how it goes. In this case, a guy obsessed with bugs, Greg Arkin, basically Weevil Underwood, is obsessed with Lana. This is one of the main takeaways of this episode, because it starts the trend of people who want Lana and are often creepy about it. We're only in episode 2, and we already have 4 people. Greg, Whitney, Clark, he's my boy, but he spies on Lana with his telescope. It's weird. And Lex. This episode shows that. The two formally meet when Lex comes to see Nell, but finds Lana. Lana tells Lex they already met, and Lex responds by saying,
I seriously doubt I'd forget meeting you.
Yeah, that's weird. But he doesn't stop there. Lana recounts a story of her seeing him and a woman skinny dipping in a pool when she was 10, and Lex says,
You're all grown up now.
Dude, she's 14 or 15. Chill out. Stop being weird. They made it uncomfortably clear that Lex has some intrigue in Lana from the beginning, even though he was constantly pushing Clark to pursue her. We don't know Lex's exact age, but he's in his 20s and he spends way too much time with underage people. Why no parent ever calls the cops is beyond me. Other things of note are the fact that Clark says his dad calls his loft his fortress of solitude. I told y'all they weren't subtle with it. Oh, and I only just realized during this rewatch that Chloe, Pete, and Clark are kind of a pseudo Lois, Jimmy Olsen, and Clark team, because this trio is investigating Greg's house and Pete is taking photos. I imagine the creators were thinking that they don't know if they'll get to the point where they can introduce Lois and Jimmy, so kind of gave us a version of that while also setting up Clark's interest in investigating and reporting. We also get to see Kryptonite's effect on Clark, and it's a pretty cool effect. We usually see it in his hands with the veins popping out and turning green. We also find out that lead protects him from kryptonite when Lex gives Clark a lead box to return Lana's necklace in. The last thing I want to mention is the music. During the episode, we hear Last Resort by Papa Roach, Wherever You Will Go by The Calling to end the episode, and of course, Save Me by Remy Zero. We get the theme song for the first time. I love this song so much. It's a great song in general, and it's a perfect song for Smallville. The last thing I'll mention is that we get to see Clark's super speed and how it plays out for him. Jonathan gets knocked off the loft and is about to fall on some sharp farming equipment, so Clark super speeds, jumping from the top down to the floor while Jonathan slowly falls. He catches Jonathan and lands on the machine, messing up in the process. I wanted to talk about this because it shows the thought that went into figuring out how to make Clark's abilities look and seem believable. Let's go to episode 3, Hothead. I honestly wasn't too excited to check this out because I thought I remembered the plot of it and didn't think it'd be super interesting. But it turned out to be a really solid episode. Some football players are caught cheating, and actually, this is the driving factor behind the entire narrative of the episode's A and B plot, and makes a whole lot of sense, honestly. The coach, who Sana's using kryptonite, calls on Clark to join the team. Against his dad's wishes, Clark decides to join the team. I love this because it shows Clark struggling with his identity and it highlights his flaws. A lot of people don't like Superman because they find him too perfect, too much of a Boy Scout, always doing the right thing. Smallville is amazing because it shows Clark constantly making mistakes. He stumbles and faces a lot of problems with navigating his responsibilities and wanting to live a regular life. And episodes like this challenge him and end up being lessons on his journey to become Superman. Essentially, it humanizes him. Also, there is tension between Clark and Jonathan in this episode. The Kents mostly get along throughout the series, so episodes where they don't are really fun. What makes this episode even better is that this cheating scandal sets off Lana's arc for the season, and in my opinion, the entire series. She questions her whole identity and her role in the world being a cheerleader when cheating is not treated like a big deal, specifically by Whitney. She starts to wonder if what she's doing is even worth it, and so she quits cheerleading and gets a job at the local coffee shop, The Beanery. This is a big deal because her mom was a cheerleader and her aunt was a cheerleader, so not following in their footsteps is an issue for her aunt, Nell. But wait, there's more. Clark and Lana aren't the only ones who have tension with their parental figures. Lex does too, as Lionel wants him to cut 20% of the workforce at the LuthorCorp plant Lex manages in Smallville. These three main characters, and yes, they are the main characters, are looking to carve their own path and step out of the shadows of their families. I think this is an especially major moment for Lana because, to me, it sets off her arc for her entire time on the show. She is looking to stand out from the shadow of the sad little girl whose parents died or just the high school cheerleader. She wants to make a difference in the world and find her way of doing that. Even if it's not executed the best all the time, that's what she aims to do throughout the entire series. As for Lex, he's fighting that demon on his shoulder that is his father, resisting that destiny that awaits him. Their stories all converge at one point in the episode, and I thought that was such a great moment of having all three of them connect with one another for their similar struggles and build stronger bonds. Oh, and this episode has one of my absolute top-tier Klana moments. When Clark and Lana talked earlier in the episode, Lana said sometimes she just wants to scream. At the end, Lana and Clark are walking on the football field, and Clark says the same thing. Lana says, "Why don't we?" And the episode ends with the two of them having their arms outstretched, screaming in an open field at the top of their lungs. It's really cute and wholesome. Next, we have episode 4, X-Ray. Two main things. Clark gets his X-ray vision, and Lana really begins that journey of self-discovery following up from the previous episode. So I love every episode where Clark gets a new power because, again, it shows him having to work on things and overcome difficulties. What's interesting is the development of X-ray vision. The first time, he sees an X-ray, but the second time, when he sees it with Pete, he sees organs and veins and vessels, and then just a few moments later, he's looking through a wall. And then it settles into the X-ray vision again. It's not a big deal, but I just found it interesting how they showed it progress as he got more control. At least that's what I think they were going for. Now with Lana, she finds her mother's old diary and discovers that her mother hated cheerleading but never had the courage to quit. This contradicts what she's been told about her mom all her life. So now, Lana is questioning herself and her place even more. She goes on this search to find her mother's graduation speech because it was censored by the school. The focus this show gives to Lana wanting more out of her life is honestly something I didn't notice as much until now as I rewatch and also remember a lot of what she goes through in the series. Again, it may not have been perfect, but it's an interesting arc and we'll keep discussing it as we go through the series. While she's going through all this, a sort of friend, Tina Greer, who is a shapeshifter, is trying to become part of her life and eventually tries to take Lana's life so she can be Lana. I only mention this to point out that we have another character obsessed with Lana, bringing the count to 5. Next is the 5th episode, Cool, and, well, there isn't much to say about this episode. A guy who needs human body heat to survive because he's perpetually cold after falling into a frozen lake pursues Chloe. So that's different, someone pursuing Chloe instead of Lana. But the one thing I do want to mention is that Clark asks Lana to go to a concert in Metropolis, and as they start to leave, he sees the news about Sean, the dude sucking heat from people, and has to leave this non-date with Lana to go help Chloe. This is the first of many times that Clark has to give up something he wants because of his responsibility to helping people. It's a small and simple but important lesson for Clark to learn. That's a lot of season 1, and it lays the groundwork for Clark becoming Superman as he understands what it means for his life to have these powers. But yeah, that's all there is to this episode. Now that we got through that bowl of a nothing episode, let's go to an episode that actually matters. Episode 6, Hourglass. Clark, Pete, and Lana are all volunteering at a retirement center where Clark encounters a woman who can see the future, Cassandra Carver. When Clark touches her hand, they both see a vision of Clark surrounded by the graves of all the people he loves. First off, him seeing the vision when no one else can is a cool way of showing him being different. But let's talk about this vision. Something I really like about season 1 is that it touches on a lot of important lessons for Clark, and this one is huge. Clark will outlive everyone else. Everyone around him will die long before he does, and there is nothing he can do about it. He can't save everyone. This is such a huge lesson for him because it's easy to feel like you're always in control when you have the powers Clark does. But even he has his limits. This episode also highlights the theme of destiny, which is given a lot of focus at the end of the episode when we see Cassandra's vision for Lex. She sees Lex as President of the United States in a white suit wearing a black glove, a nod to Lex in the comics. He's then standing in a field of sunflowers and they all die and turn black around him. It then starts raining blood. It's an amazing sequence and definitely worth watching. But it all symbolizes Lex's descent into evil and the darkness he will bring to the world. And at the end of the vision, Cassandra dies holding Lex's hand. It's almost like he's the angel of death. At least that's how I interpreted it. Both Clark and Lex start to be confronted with their destinies. Cassandra tells Clark that she sees him in other people's visions, saving them from danger and death. And while Lex can't see the vision, Cassandra dying right after it is a harrowing foreshadowing of the death he will bring. The rest of the episode is nothing special, but I will note that Lana starts to get more involved with Chloe, Pete, and Clark, all looking into the mystery of this episode's kryptonite-infected person. They're becoming their own certified Mystery Inc. or a Power Rangers team. That's how I saw it. Which do you think it's more like? Anyway, fantastic episode. Next up is episode 7, Jennifer's Body. Wait, hold on. Sorry, my bad. It's called Craving, but it kind of is Jennifer's Body. Or I guess Jennifer's Body is Craving. Anyway, a young Amy Adams is the main guest star for this episode, playing the freak of the week, who develops an unhealthy appetite for deer and boys. I told you, not much to say about this episode other than the fact that Clark once again has to miss an opportunity to spend time with Lana when he has to skip out on being her escort for her birthday party to save Pete from Amy Adams. This episode does end on a really cute moment of Clark setting up a drive-in movie for Lana's birthday present, which is a memory she cherished with her parents. So basically, this episode was another chapter in the will they, won't they saga, but they really are adorable together. Am I becoming a Klana shipper? Nah. Oh, and during that end scene, Hero by Enrique Iglesias is playing. I only mention that to show how huge Smallville was that they had artists like that used for the show. Alright, on to episode 8, Jitters, featuring the Candyman, Tony Todd. And that's probably the most notable and exciting thing about this episode. Well, that and the end scene where after this whole hostage situation at the Smallville LuthorCorp plant, Clark and his parents embrace in a genuine loving hug while Lionel feigns an emotional hug with Lex for the cameras. We see Lex looking at the Kents, clearly yearning for the true love and care that Clark has. There is one more thing. Listen, over the course of these videos, you're going to hear me be super critical of Lex because I don't think he deserves the sympathy that people give him. But in this episode, he did put his life at risk genuinely, and I do believe he did not know about Lionel's level 3 experiments. So I'll give him his moment here. But now, we get to a great episode, episode 9, rogue. Clark gets seen by a corrupt cop, Sam Phelan, stopping a bus with his body, such a sick moment by the way, and then gets blackmailed to help him commit crimes. When Clark initially refuses, Phelan frames Jonathan for murder, forcing Clark to help him. Clark does eventually outsmart him, and Phelan gets killed in a firefight with the police, taking Clark's secret with him. This entire episode feels so different from pretty much every other episode in the season. There is no Freak of the Week, for instance. Along with that, Clark is challenged physically. First time, he has to dodge bullets, and emotionally, there's a point where he threatens Phelan and even admits to Jonathan that he wanted to kill Phelan. This is probably Clark's biggest test yet, and it's explored so well. Another thing of note is the first real moment of friendship between Lana and Chloe. I briefly mentioned it, but Lana isn't initially part of the friend group in the show. She gradually starts to become part of it after she quits cheerleading. She helps Chloe get back control of the torch after the principal censors her. Smallville really started the story all the way at the beginning, and it's cool to see these dynamics develop. Let's move on to episode 10, Shimmer. There isn't much about this episode to care about. It's a basic Freak of the Week plot, and I have my thoughts about episodes like this, but we'll delve into it more in the end of season wrap up. The biggest takeaway for me is that we learn a bit about Lex's relationship with his mom, who died when he was young. His relationship with his mom and losing her is integral to the person Lex is and will become. So I appreciate that insight. I also like the small development between Clark and Whitney. Whitney has been so antagonistic to Clark, but when Whitney seems to be going through some difficulties, Clark actually reaches out to him, and Whitney opens up to Clark about his father being sick, something he hasn't told Lana yet. Clark encourages Whitney to trust Lana and share this with her. It's a nice moment between the two, and signals a turn in their relationship. It also displays Clark's character, as Lana began growing closer to Clark, in part due to Whitney distancing himself from Lana. But when Clark has the opportunity for something to happen between him and Lana, he instead tells her to reach out to Whitney. Moments like these are one of the reasons I admire Clark and Superman so much. He does what's right, even if the other choice would be good for him. Oh, and this end shot of Clark looks so good and perfectly captures his emotional state as well as the burden of being him. But now we get to a fun episode, episode 11, Hug. A business tycoon, Bob Rickman, with the power of persuasion, comes to Smallville to make a profit. We find out that a guy who lives in the woods, Kyle Tippett, shares these powers. In fact, these two used to be best friends and business partners. The episode literally shows us what happens between Clark and Lex through this relationship. You got a rich capitalist and a low-key dude living off the land. This episode calls it out itself at the end when Clark asks Lex if they'll ever end up like that. And Lex responds by saying,
Trust me, Clark. Our friendship is going to be the stuff of legend.
Come on. Could you be any more blunt about it? But I'm not complaining. I love this. I love the ways the show foreshadows their future relationship and the naivete of both men to think they'll actually stay friends. It gives a youthful optimism and hope to their characters, more of a wishing and yearning for Lex, who is constantly fighting those demons inside of him. We also get to see Clark be bulletproof, which is amazing. The way the bullets bounce off of him looks so fire. Oh, and a cool detail is that Clark has bruises from the bullets, showing that his powers are still developing. Another little thing is that Chloe kisses Clark when under the control of Kyle's persuasion powers. It's not that big of a deal, but it does set up a growing romance, sort of, not really, between the two. I'll go into that in a few episodes. But on to the next episode, episode 12, Leech. Clark loses his powers when saving a classmate, Eric, played by Shawn Ashmore, who was just in the X-Men movie that was released the year before, which I gotta say, it's wild how many stars were on this show, especially season 1 when the show is brand new. Clark gets struck by lightning while Eric is holding a piece of kryptonite, which causes a power transfer. Clark then gets to experience life as a normal boy. He plays basketball with Pete and Whitney, something we learn he's never done before. He has had to play it so safe with his powers that he doesn't even join in recreational fun with his friends. This man was so sheltered in life, understandably so, but still, damn. And he shows exhaustion and fatigue, also something he's never experienced before. Isn't it so ridiculous that Superman's powers include not being tired or sweating? Like, what? What I love about this episode, even more than seeing Clark experience normal life for a day, is that we see who Clark could be without Ma and Pa Kent. Because when Eric is challenged, he becomes violent and dangerous. Also, Eric's dad is hinted at being physically abusive and is definitely emotionally abusive. So when Eric gets these powers, his parents aren't caring and concerned for him. They fear him. So it becomes clear that the reason Clark is the way he is and becomes the Superman we love is because of his parents and how they raised him with love and compassion and understanding. And a huge part of that is the fact that his parents don't always have the answers, but they make sure to reassure him that they'll figure it out together and that he can trust them to be there for him. We see this several times in the series, but I appreciate how early these lessons are incorporated into Clark's journey in the show. Oh, and I find it so amusing that in several instances throughout the series, when Lex is questioning Clark about having a secret, having abilities, Clark conveniently doesn't have powers and Lex sees him bleed, which happens in this episode when Lex confronts Clark about the car crash after Lex had a reporter, Roger Nixon, investigate it. I find that such funny and clever writing, but in a fun and interesting storytelling, we gotta focus on Whitney. Episode 13, Kinetic, is a Whitney-focused episode where Whitney is sad because he lost his scholarship and now feels he's stuck in Smallville forever. So he joins a crew of never-wases, never-wers, dudes who peaked in high school. Whatever. They commit crimes with the powers they get from kryptonite tattoos. Woo, so exciting. The one thing I do appreciate is, yet again, Whitney opens up to Clark before anyone else, including Lana. Dude, I don't think you love this girl. Or at the very least, you do not trust her. All I have are a few small notes. First, this episode dates the show so much. Lex gets a floppy disk stolen. How many of y'all even know what a floppy disk is? Then, Pete hijacks the phone line in the hospital to give Chloe internet access. Wow. Okay. Second, there's a mention of particle accelerators. Not sure if this was a nod to the Flash or anything, but thought it was cool to mention. Also, wardrobe has been killing it with Clark's attire. Sometimes he wears a blue shirt with a red jacket, and sometimes the opposite. In this episode, he has a blue shirt, but a red collar. Clark wears so much red and blue in this show. I love it. The last thing I want to note is that Chloe falls out a window from more than 50 feet, possibly 100, and all she ends up with is a mild concussion and a broken arm. How? How is her spine not turned to mush? Because this is Smallville, I guess. But on to episode 14, Zero. Okay, pause. This episode is the first of many times Smallville uses what's referred to as the how we got here trope. Basically, the episode starts with a scene from the climax of the episode, then takes us back in time, in this case, 1 week, and shows us how we got to that point. I cannot emphasize how much I do not like this trope, this storytelling device. I get it. I get that having this dramatic opening is meant to engage audiences and get them to watch. But my problem is that it's usually a scene where someone is in peril or there's some tense situation, and while the intention, I think, is to build up the suspense and intrigue, I really don't find it to do either. In fact, it does the opposite for me. I'm less interested now because I know whatever is being teased isn't going to happen. Plus, those first few minutes of the episode you used to show us this scene could simply be used to tell us a story, and we get to this moment quicker, and it's more of a surprise. It's similar to when creators include a teaser at the beginning of their YouTube videos. Why? I clicked on the video. You don't need to entice me to watch it. That's why I clicked on it. Teasers to promote the video? Absolutely. But teasers in the video itself are so nonsensical in my opinion. In this episode, Lex is hanging upside down in a straitjacket in a dark room, which is a wild visual. He's confronted by some man we've never seen, and the man points a gun at Lex, and that's when the theme song kicks in. Admittedly, this is a compelling scene, but I don't need to see how we got there. Just give me the story chronologically so that when we get to the scene, I am on the edge of my seat wondering what's going to happen. I mean, I really don't care about this character or Lex's past and the incident at Club Zero, which is what this episode is about. In fairness, the show has mentioned Club Zero and something happening involving Lex in a few episodes before, so I appreciate the writers following through on that. But I don't care about the story. And I care less now that I've seen Lex in peril because I know he's gonna be fine. I feel the point of this trope is to entice people to wonder what will happen to the character, but it ends up being a bait and switch where usually nothing happens. And maybe it's just the way Smallville does it that I don't enjoy, because Smallville uses this trope repeatedly throughout the series and it hardly ever works. Only one time that I can think of do I feel it's actually effective, but this time in particular, it definitely doesn't work. I promise that this is the only time I will rant about this trope, but I will bring it up whenever it's used in the show because I despise it almost every time. But Bloodhaven and Central City are mentioned in this episode. Cool. Moving on. Episode 15, Nicodemus, is a fun episode, but also not that interesting. So Dr. Hamilton, who I haven't mentioned before but has shown up in a few episodes, is a former professor who now studies kryptonite and has been hired by Lex to research its effect on people. He tests kryptonite on a flower that was believed to be extinct because it infects people and is actually able to resurrect the flower, the Nicodemus. This flower causes people to lose their inhibitions, infecting Jonathan Kent, Lana, and Pete. Like I said, this episode is fun because we get to see several characters play a different persona. Other than that, Pete is more open with Clark about his disdain for Lex and the Luthors, something which Clark is surprised to hear because he doesn't pay attention, honestly. I gotta point out that when Pete gets infected, they cut from Chloe looking for him to this shot, and it's the creepiest face ever. There's another trope that Smallville uses in this episode that irritates me, and that is ending a scene mid-conversation. So Pete goes after Lex and sees Hamilton working with him, who escapes. When Clark shows up, Pete tells Clark that Hamilton and Lex are working together. Clark disarms Pete and knocks him out. He checks on Lex and asks him if Hamilton was here, and Lex responds, "What do you think?" That's not an answer, my dude. He's asking because he doesn't know. Then the scene just ends. Clark apparently doesn't interrogate it any further. This happens so often, and it does get annoying because if people just talk to each other, they'd figure things out quicker. But I know, that would take away from the drama. I still don't have to like it. I enjoy this episode, though I do not care for it much. But now, let's get to an episode I love and was so excited to rewatch, episode 16, Stray, where the Kents meet a young boy, Ryan, after Martha accidentally hits him with her car when he was running away from his abusive stepfather. Clark takes an instant liking to him, and the sibling dynamic is adorable. This is one of my favorite tropes in the show, which is Clark interacting with young people. He's always so good with kids and younger teens. He gives them what his parents give him, genuine love and care, something most of them usually have not experienced. It's made even better because Ryan has the power to read minds and discovers Clark's secret. For the first time in the series, Clark doesn't have to hide who he is with someone other than his parents. You can see how much Ryan looks up to Clark and how much Clark enjoys being an older brother. I don't even care about the actual plot of this episode, but I am totally invested in this brother relationship. We also learned that Lex had a younger brother, Julian, who died when he was young. But yeah, back to Clark. He just knows how to make people feel safe and comfortable, and it doesn't have anything to do with his actual superpowers. I mean, maybe that's part of it, but it's just his personality and his demeanor. He's compassionate and caring, and people gravitate towards him, perfectly highlighting what makes him a symbol of hope. I love Ryan, and I love this episode. Episode 17 is another typical freak of the week with a guy putting old people out of their misery in his mind. But the B plot is where the intrigue is. We know that Lex has been investigating the car crash and that he even told Clark. One of Lionel's guys, a character we've seen a few times named Dominic, speaks with Pa Kent about the investigation into the car crash. Jonathan is shocked and surprised. He brings it up to Clark when Clark suggests they go to a football game courtesy of Lex instead of their annual fishing trip, which Clark feels he's outgrown. Jonathan becomes furious to find out that Clark knew about what Lex was doing and didn't tell him. Clark then claps back saying he's not a little kid anymore and he only did the fishing trips to make Jonathan happy. The Kents are almost always on the same page, so seeing real tension between them is always a compelling story. The two obviously reconcile at the end of the episode, but to see Clark at odds with his dad in such an emotional way is great storytelling. The episode also has another moment of Clark reaching out to Whitney and connecting with him, convincing Whitney to visit his dad in the hospital. I actually wish we got more moments with these two because their interactions are always so fascinating with how earnest they are. It does beg the question, however, why are Lana and Whitney even together? Because he never confides in her. Do they actually like each other? So bizarre. Speaking of bizarre, this next episode, Drone, is bizarre in the sense that I have almost no notes about it. Usually I can find something to talk about, but with this episode, there's not much to say. Even the Lex subplot was uninteresting to me, other than the fact that the reporter looking to get a story of Lex is the same actress who played Connie Moreau in the Mighty Ducks franchise. And that's just a fun fact for me, because I love those movies. But hey, when you have over 20 episodes a season, not all of them are going to be good. And this trend continues with the next episode, Crush. Adam Brody is this week's freak, Justin, who is an artist that has telekinesis. Principal Quan dies, and so does Whitney's dad. And Clark gets jealous seeing Chloe with Justin, realizing he may have feelings for her. At the end of the episode, he asks her to spring formal, and she says yes. Honestly, even though the show has been hinting and building at Chloe's interest in Clark, Clark liking Chloe comes out of nowhere. He's never shown any interest, but now he does. It's weird to me, and they don't have romantic chemistry in my opinion. I may not be a Klana shipper, but at least you could feel the tension and the sparks between the two. Clark and Chloe though? Nah, forget about it. One last thing. This episode has the first Smallville funeral scene of the series, and these are always shot so beautifully. On to the second to last episode of the season, Obscura. And while there's a lot of great action, I don't care. There's more focus on Clark and Chloe as a romantic item, but I'm not buying it. But like I said, the action is great. Clark punches a hole into the ground and pulls a coffin out of it with one hand. It looked so good. He also blocks a bullet, but it bounces off his hand and hits a mirror on the roof of the building, with the shards falling onto Lana and covers her to protect her. I think the special effects used in this episode were amazing. The other thing of note is that Lex is testing the land where Clark's ship was found, because some guy talked about seeing a ship fall from the sky during the meteor shower, and Lex finds this. The octagonal disc, shown to be a piece of Clark's ship. Now we've reached the season finale, Tempest. And I'll say it right now, this is a fantastic finale. Tension is brought in right at the beginning when Lionel closes down the Smallville plant, completely throwing Lex under the bus. Now the whole town is in an uproar, including Chloe's father, who worked there and is now considering moving back to Metropolis, just when her and Clark were getting romantically involved. Darn. But what's more important is that Clark gets blown up in his truck. He's unfazed, obviously, but still, it's so unexpected. He just steps out of it and tears his shirt off. We then see Scumbag Supreme Roger Nixon filming Clark, getting evidence on camera of his abilities. Nixon then spies on the Kents and finds out the location of the spaceship and the piece that Lex has and steals it from Lex's office. In other news, Whitney decides to join the military and ships off. All I gotta say is, see ya! I've not cared about you one bit, Whitney. As if there wasn't enough drama in this episode, though, a storm is on its way to Smallville. There's a lot going on in this episode. It's great tension, honestly. But before we get to the climactic moments, gotta shout out having Remy Zero be the band at the spring formal. Remy Zero, the band that plays the theme song for the show, playing the theme song at the dance. And I love how Clark and Pete are just like, oh, these guys are great. And Pete just yells, yeah, Remy Zero! It's just so silly, but so Smallville. And I love it. Anyway, back to the plot and the stories that are building. So Lex has been trying to find a way to save the plant, and Lionel finds out that Lex is using his mom's stock to help his buyout plan, confronting Lex in his office. But suddenly, the storm intensifies, causing the window to burst, sending Lex and Lionel flying across the room. A bookcase falls on Lex, causing a gash on his eye, leaving it bloody. And a pillar falls on Lionel, with Lex just staring at his father, who is begging for help. Lana is in tears, driving back after dropping Whitney off at the bus stop when the storm sends debris flying into her car, causing her to crash in a ditch on the side of the road. She steps out and sees 3 tornadoes moving towards her. Insane! Meanwhile, Nixon is in the storm cellar and takes out the key, which then flies into the ship. The Kents enter the cellar to avoid the storm and catch Nixon, but he runs out into the storm with Jonathan running after him to protect Clark's secret. Clark and Chloe dance to Perfect Memory by Remy Zero, which is apparently one of Chloe's favorite songs, and just as they're about to kiss, they're interrupted by an announcement about the storm, which sends Clark running off to check on Lana. As Clark reaches Lana, who locked herself in her car, he sees her get swallowed up and uplifted by one of the tornadoes. He speeds in after her, and that's how the episode ends. Dude, that is how you do a finale. No matter how inconsistent some of these stories are explored throughout the season, they all culminated in such a compelling manner and left us with a lot of big questions. Will Clark save Lana from the tornadoes? Will Lex let his dad die? And will Jonathan stop Roger Nixon from exposing Clark's secret? The tension was felt throughout the entire episode, and right from the beginning, when Lionel closed the plant, the stakes were set high and kept being raised. There aren't even many character moments I need to discuss because this was the climax of all the narratives that had been set up throughout the season. But I do want to talk about Lex because this is the first major moment with his dad, and they are constantly at odds in the series. There have been a few instances of Lex challenging Lionel, but none of them seem to carry a lot of weight the way this did. And the cliffhanger we are left with of whether or not Lex will help his father is a major moment because it asks Lex what side of him will prevail. The dark side or the light side? The man he wants to be or the man he often is? Superb job with that. It definitely leaves so much intrigue for the follow-up in the next season, and I can't wait to get to that. But that's not until the next video. For now, we're going to wrap up season 1, sharing my final thoughts of the season. Overall, I think this was a great introduction to the show. I may not have loved every episode or even been entertained by all of them, but I enjoy them for the most part. The way I view season 1 is that the whole season is getting us familiar, not only with the show, but also with the world of Smallville. That includes the format, meaning the freak of the week, people being infected by kryptonite, the character relationships, the tension between Jonathan and Lex, Clark and Lex friendship, the growing romance between Clark and Lana, Chloe, Pete, and Clark being an investigating trio, and more. A lot of the episodes, I feel, are slice of life stories. So they may not have an overall narrative significance, but these are Clark's adventures, the villains he has to defeat, the people he has to save, and the identity he has to understand as he navigates existing in this world. And when you look at it that way, the episodes work better, in my opinion. A lot of the B and C plots do the legwork in setting up more long-term storytelling, while the A plots are just your everyday trials for Clark. I respect it, and in that sense, I think they work great. Now let's talk about characters, specifically my favorite and least favorite characters of the season. For favorite, easy, it's Jonathan Kent. Jonathan Kent is my favorite fictional father of all time. The way he is firm yet reassuring to Clark and always has his back, even when they're at odds, is so vital to Clark's journey. And I love that this Midwestern farmer just knows how to care for his son and help him even when he doesn't have the answers. Pa Kent will still find a way to give Clark some solace, make him feel loved, and not allow him to feel alone. It is so important. And this isn't to take away anything from Martha. She is important too. But so far, we've mostly seen Jonathan's relationship with Clark and the impact that he has. And it's beautiful. Now, my least favorite character is Pete. That man does pretty much nothing throughout this season. I bet some of y'all thought I'd say Whitney, and while I have my thoughts about him, which I'll get to, at least the writers care about him. Even if I didn't, he was given time and focus and some growth. He went from high school jock to joining the Marines. What did Pete do? I'll tell you, nothing. He is so irrelevant to the story. There is one episode where he matters, Craving, and it's not even about him. It's about Amy Adams. I think he was included to be Clark's best friend, but the writers quickly realized how good the Lex and Clark dynamic works and how that will propel the show forward, and then just forgot about Pete. And I can't blame them. Clark and Lex make the show. So yeah, my least favorite is Pete. Getting into other characters, now let's talk about Whitney. I did not and still do not care about this man. I don't care about his sick then dead dad. I don't care that he felt lost in life and had no direction. I don't care that he lost his scholarship and he's upset he's going to be stuck in Smallville. And I do not care that he's shipping off to the Marines. God bless. Leave our screens. His stories did nothing for me because we never really got to know him. So he doesn't matter. Someone who I do care about though was Lana. I forgot how much Lana explores the idea of finding her place and her identity in the world, much like Clark. It makes sense why they connect, and I appreciate this journey that began for her. I feel the show overall does a good job of keeping that theme for her, though it gets wonky at times. Let's move on to the second of our three main characters, Lex Luthor. I enjoy the idea of Lex meeting Clark at a time when he's attempting to step out of his father's shadow, as it makes him wrestle with the good and evil inside him. Clark symbolizes hope for Lex, hope for kinship, love, and light in his life. He's shown yearning for what Clark has with his parents, as noted in the episode Jitters, but in other episodes too. We all know that Lex will eventually turn evil and become the villain we all love to hate, so it was clever of the writers to use that as the basis of Lex's journey, constantly playing with the idea of Lex wanting to be good, but consumed by darkness. I respect the efforts Lex makes this season to show he's changed and that he is capable of good, but I love how he still can't help himself and makes bad and selfish decisions that feed his ego and the gnawing evil he has yet to fully embrace. Having him and Clark start as friends was a great decision in my opinion. It adds much depth and weight to their story when they become enemies. Chloe is a fun character, but definitely works better as a sidekick than a main focus, in my opinion. Martha isn't given much yet, but she's fantastic and always will be. Her role is just as important as Jonathan's to Clark's development, and we see more of it as time goes on. And she does have her moments this season, like the time she has to be the voice of reason when there's tension between Jonathan and Clark. And then there's Clark. I think this season does an amazing job of introducing us to his journey and his struggles, showing us the many lessons he still has to learn, the abilities he still has to hone, and the understanding he still has to gain to be Superman. Now I want to talk about my favorite and least favorite episodes. For favorite episode, I feel like it's not fair to include the pilot or the finale, so I'm gonna have to go with Rogue. Like I said, it's so different compared to any other episode. It's not your typical freak of the week, and it challenges Clark in a lot of new and interesting ways. To see Clark get so angry and physically threaten Phelan was intense. That's not my Clark. The fact that he got pushed to that level, that he almost hurt someone, says a lot about how much growing he has to do and what an important lesson this was for him. Phelan is such a trash bag and was a great antagonist for the episode. I love it so much. And my least favorite episode of the season is Shimmer. The A plot was nothing, with characters that didn't matter before and don't matter after, and the B plot was Whitney focused. It was like everything I don't like in one episode. Some of y'all may have thought I'd say drone because I had little to say about it, but I enjoyed that episode, though I do think they could have taken it in a different and better direction. But this episode, Shimmer, I didn't care for any of the characters whose stories were being given focus. The less I talk about it, the better. Overall, season 1 is a fun time with a lot of small, interesting moments, but also many pointless stories. I didn't even mention the character of Victoria, who was in several episodes, working with Lex, but not really because she was conning him with her father. Stuff like that was wasted TV time in my opinion. And there are quite a few episodes that just don't get me excited at all. Again, as slice of life stories, that's fine, but that doesn't mean they're free from critique. Still, the main characters, the ones that matter, are all established well enough to set them off on their journeys. The effects look awesome most of the time, and the performances are all strong. The only downside of this season, really, in terms of characters, is Pete. He is such a superfluous character. But season 1 establishes a strong foundation for the show to build on and expand the narratives and character dynamics further in future seasons. And we'll discuss how they expand in the next video when we discuss season 2. But until then, join me in the comments where we can discuss and debate all of our thoughts about season 1 together. Until then, much love.